and welcome to my very first Midyear Freakout tag. The best book that I've read in 2020, I'm a little bit embarrassed to say this because it took me a little while to get around to it, but she's been on my list for a long time, and it was Binti by Nnedi Okorafor. If you've never heard of it, or if you've heard of it but haven't gotten around to reading it, I highly recommend it. It's this amazing little novella about this girl who must go against her culture to realize her ambitions. Obviously, that's something that speaks to the experience of a lot of black and brown women. Within one short novella, Okorafor manages to talk about so many different things. I spoke about it on my Instagram, but it has so much to say about the sacrifices that women need to make when it comes to following their dreams and their ambitions. It's really good. The best sequel that I've read in 2020 would be the other books in the Binti world. I really thought about choosing something different, but honestly, that particular world that Okorafor imagines for her protagonist, it's amazing. Also, it's now raining, so I don't know if you can hear it on the audio, if the audio is picking it up, but if you want to know what's that weird sound in the background, it's raining. The new release that I haven't read yet, but I really want to, is the latest installment in the Poppy War series by R.F. Kuang. I came really late to this series and I'm kind of kicking myself about it, but you know, there's just so much to read. But the moment I heard about the Poppy War series, I knew that I would be really into it. I'm just a little bit hesitant about starting a series that isn't complete yet. So, I've just been bitten too many times. I'm just very cautious these days about starting a series, not knowing if the author can complete it. But I really can't wait to read the Poppy War series. Over the past year, I've been on a real Japanese kick, and now I'm kind of trying to diversify into other parts of Asia, and China is just such a tempting target. The release that I'm most looking forward to in 2020, so before I started filming this, I knew exactly what it was. It's the second part of Arkady Martine's science fiction series. The first book in the series was called A Memory Called Empire, and it's about colonialism in space. It's amazing. I really enjoyed it. It sort of harkens back to a lot of themes and ideas that I love to read about in fantasy and otherwise. So I was really looking forward to the second book in the duology, which is called A Desolation Called Peace. And it was supposed to come out later this year, but I just checked and the publication date's been pushed back to March of 2021. Boo. So I guess my other great anticipated release of 2020 would be Brandon Sanderson's Rhythm of War. It's a continuation of his magnum opus, this giant series that he's writing, and the first 3 books in the series, or is it 4? I think this is the 4th book. I kind of lose track, which is fine because these are like giant books. But the first few books in the series are great. Sometimes, at the rate that Sanderson writes, he can sometimes miss a tiny bit in execution. But I think so far, like his main series, he's been just doing an amazing job of it. So I'm really looking forward to the next installment, because with each installment, it's amazing the detail that he goes into. And I love that kind of detailed world building and storytelling. The biggest disappointment of 2020 for me was Tasha Suri's Empire of Sand. I was really excited about this. I wrote about this on my Instagram. I was really excited about this series going in because she said, it is kind of based on the Mughal Empire, and I wanted to see a book in a setting that I had always believed would make great fodder for a fantasy series, or even a historical series. I don't know why more people don't write about the Mughal Empire. In fact, I'll probably do a video later on about some books that are set in that time period, which I think do a really great job. But Tasha Suri's was a fantasy series, so I was especially interested. And I really like certain things that she did with the series, in that she wasn't lazy about her world building, you know. She didn't just take the Mughal Empire and then put in a few jinns in it or something. Because we all know authors who do things like that. No, but this was a really fully realized world, and she used elements of the Mughal Empire and these other folklore touches, I guess. And she's definitely built a world that is uniquely her own, but the execution of it is so bogged down in details. A friend of mine described it as like, you know, she felt like she was plodding across the desert herself in search of the story, and that's kind of true. I do like detail and I do like world building, but I need it to have some kind of pace. I'm not opposed to character driven stories or to stories taking their own time. I mean, I grew up reading Robert Jordan, for God's sake, but I do need a book, especially the first book in a series, to sort of have a pace of action. I know there's a second book in the series out and the description sounds great. I just don't know when I'm going to go back to it. The biggest surprise for me in 2020 is actually a very old series. So Raymond E. Feist is a legend of the game, like everybody's read him, and he co-wrote a series called the Empire Trilogy with an author called Janny Wirtz. And the way that it's fashioned, so his big work is called Magician, and it's a story of this young boy who discovers he has powers, yada yada, you know the drill. It's very 80s, 90s, high fantasy sort of deal. Now, I remember reading Magician a long time ago, and maybe I was too young, or maybe I'm right and the book just wasn't that great. I do know that a lot of people really love it and they're really devoted to it. I'm sorry, I just didn't appreciate it that much. So I read that first book and then I put it aside, and that must have been like, I don't know, like 20, 25 years ago. A very long time ago. And then this year, a friend of mine recommended that I pick up this trilogy, and I was like, are you sure? And she said, yeah. And oh my God, I'm so glad she said it, because it's completely my jam. I mentioned earlier that I was on this Japanese kick for a while, for the past year or so, and this is very, you know, for Japan, the way the Americans used to write it back in the 80s and 90s. There was this entire period where American writers, especially like historical and fantasy writers, were churning out all these books about Japan that was not quite Japan, but enough to like appeal to the exotic. It's kind of gross when you think about it in context and in retrospect, but it's also just weirdly enjoyable when you read it. I guess that would be problematic if that was the only Japanese stuff that you read, but or you know, Japanese. But if you're able to read it in context, I don't know, it's fun. And this particular arc of the Magician series, because Magician as a series, it has these different arcs and they're set in these different worlds and they all sort of interconnect. So you'll see characters here in the Empire Trilogy, for example, who interconnect with Magician and the other books in the series. And it doesn't really change how you read the series itself, because the series is centered upon this one remarkable woman who is kicking ass. Maybe I just respond better to like strong female protagonists. Maybe that was my problem with Magician. But seriously, check it out. It's great. My new favorite author, either a debut author or an older one but that's new to me, would be KJ Charles. Now, obviously, I've heard of her for a long time, and I was interested, but you know, I was just making my way through my pile. And I'm so glad that I found her. You know, she is great, not just for her work, which I really enjoy. Like, she writes these queer-coded romances, and by queer-coded, I mean a bunch of different things, but they're about queer people. and she writes historicals as well as fantasy. I don't know if she's written anything contemporary, but I'm just sort of making my way through her book list. And I've read her Magpie series, and then I've read a couple of her romances, her historical romances. And you know what? I really enjoyed it. But what I've really enjoyed since discovering her is her Goodreads page, which I highly recommend. She is really great at reading and reviewing other authors, and I know personally of people like my author friends whom she has recommended, and it's really turned things around for them. And I really appreciate how supportive she is, and also I really appreciate how well she can encapsulate what these different books are about. And she talks about the writing process sometimes on Twitter, and I really enjoy that as well, because she keeps it really real, you know. And every single book that she's recommended on her Goodreads page, the ones that I've gotten, I've enjoyed every single one of them. And that's rare. Like, I don't usually trust other people's opinions when it comes to books. Or rather, I have a very select few people whose opinions I trust. And KJ Charles just exploded onto the scene, and she is now my #1 authority when it comes to certain kinds of books. My newest fictional crush, okay, this one's a bit of a doozy. There's this fan fiction writer called Forthright, and they write these sort of fantasy stylings on Japanese fairy tales. And the first book that I read by them, and I don't know how I ended up, oh, you know why? Because KJ Charles recommended them. That's how I ended up reading them for the first time. The first book in the series is called Tsumiko and the Enslaved Fox, and I read the blurb and I was immediately on board. And it's literally about this very young, very sheltered woman who inherits an enslaved fox, like a magical fox. And I don't want to say too much about it, because I think, like, if you're not familiar with Japanese fairy tales, then this is something that you should discover for yourself, and this book is something that you should discover for yourself. I've read the other books in the series, and some of them are kind of hit and miss, but this particular book, like, I loved it. And the fox in it, there's a scene where Tsumiko and he are getting to know each other a little bit better, and in Japanese folklore, you know, the fox has many tails. And the more tails it has, the more cunning and the more wiser and older the fox is. But this particular fox has been enslaved, and he's had magical restrictions placed on him. And so he doesn't have as many tails as a fox of his age should have. And so when they're trying to get to know each other a little bit better, you know, there's a scene where she asks him how many tails he has. And he shows her, but he feels really sad and embarrassed and shy about it. And my little heart just went, "Aww, you can't judge me. You fell in love with Robin Hood." My newest favorite character would have to be Cassiopeia Tun from Gods of Jade and Shadow by Silvia Moreno Garcia. I love her so much. Like, she just does not take shit from anyone. And the thing about her is that she knows that she has to pay a price for being as sassy and as no nonsense as she is, but she doesn't care. She has her principles and she knows she's right. And she's so strong. Like, you know, I am so over the trope of the weak, helpless, clutter-brained, flustered princess awaiting a savior trope of women protagonists that we see in so much of fantasy. I want to see more women who kick butt and take no names. If you haven't read this book, then I really recommend it. It's a lot of fun, and it's an entire section of fantasy and folklore that was very unfamiliar to me. And maybe it's for you as well. In fact, I loved it so much that I pre-ordered her next book, which is called Mexican Gothic and is out at the end of June. A book that made me cry, I really thought about it, but I don't think there was anything this year that made me cry. A lot of my angst and my anxiety and my fears and my heartbreak this year was about real life events. I don't think I've read anything this year, fiction-wise, that was as heartbreaking as the real life events that were coming across my Twitter timeline on a daily basis. You can't go from watching a video of a child trying to wake its dead mother because the child is a baby and they don't understand that their mother has passed away, to, reading about some girl's heartbreak and being like, oh no, I must cry. I can't do it. Sorry, I'm a bit of a party pooper. A book that made me happy this year, I've been rereading a lot of Eloisa James. I know exactly what I'm getting with James. It's well-researched historical romances with a lot of character development and a lot of banter and steamy sex. I'm a very simple girl, like all of these things make me very happy, and they were kind of my self-medication technique when I was just trying to get through this horrendous first half of 2020. The most beautiful book that I have bought this year has to be The Gods of Jade and Shadow. I find like a lot of the fantasy covers, especially with female protagonists, they kind of follow this template as of late. So there's usually, it's like a jewel-toned, rich, dark background. It's either dark blue or emerald green or ruby red, and then there's vines with flowers on them and perhaps a couple of tiny birds that are also similarly jewel-toned but in high contrast. And it's very pretty, and obviously they're all very beautiful, but they kind of give a cookie cutter feel when you're looking at them in a bookstore because it's just an entire array of covers that look exactly the same. But The Gods of Jade and Shadow, I mean, look at it. It's a masterpiece. I love that it's a design. I love the colors. I love how they pop. I love how they draw attention to the clean lines of the font. I love it. What do I need to read by the end of the year? Probably nothing. I mean, this isn't my job or anything, so I don't need to, but there is an unreasonable amount of books on my list. And I was just looking at the things that I was most excited to read, and Naomi Novik has a new standalone book, or maybe it's going to be the first part of a series, I don't know. But it's called A Deadly Education, and I know everybody's been talking about it because it's Naomi Novik. Like I said, I'm looking forward to Mexican Gothic, and so here's the thing, I've never read S.A. Chakraborty's Daevabad trilogy. A lot of people have talked about it over the past few years, and I've always thought about it, but again, like I said, I'm really, really wary of picking up a trilogy or any kind of series that hasn't been finished as yet, because once bitten, twice shy. But the last book in the series comes out this year, so I'm thinking maybe I should pick up the first book and see if it's my speed. I spoke about Brandon Sanderson's Rhythm of War, but I'm also trying to get into his Skyward or Skyshot series. I forget exactly what it's called, but it's about this young woman who wants to join the Space Force after her dad seemingly turned traitor, and it's a redemption story from the sounds of it, but it's also about, hijinks in space. I love hijinks in space. Then Julie Kogawa has this series called Shadow of the Fox. Again, that is absolutely up my alley. My name is Amrita, and this is Amrita by the Book. Let me know if there are other books that I should be putting on my list. I'd love some suggestions. For more videos, please hit the subscribe button.